Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start exploring vector graphics. And the first suite of vector graphics that we're going to explore is working with the type tool in Photoshop. So I'm going to start by creating a blank canvas. I'm going to go to File, New, and if I were creating some text that was going to be printed, I'd work at Print Resolution. In this case, I'm going to work at Web Resolution, so I'm going to go to Web. I'm going to choose a canvas dimension. I'm going to choose the Web Large 1920 by 1080 in pixels at 72 dpi. I'm going to click Create. Here's my artboard. Now what I want to do is deploy my type tool. There's two ways to deploy the type tool. One is to click on the type tool. There are four types of type tools. There's horizontal type, vertical type, and then vertical type mask and horizontal type mask. Most of the time, you'll probably simply use the horizontal type tool. I'm going to click on that horizontal type tool. And then the first thing I do is choose the size. So I'll start with it at 72 dpi, 72 points, excuse me. I'm going to click. It's going to make some Greek on the screen, and then I type in my word. And first thing I want to do is commit the text. Now that I've committed the text, I can grab my move tool and I can position it anywhere on the screen. So anytime I just want to type a phrase or a word or something like that, I'll just click. The other way is to click and create a type container. So with the same tool, I click on my horizontal type tool, click and drag, make a type container, and then I can type in that type container All right, so those are the two ways that I can deploy the type tool. And what I'm going to do is we're going to work with the header text, and then we'll work with the type container. So what I'm going to do right now is save this document, File, Save As. I'll save it to my Documents folder, and I'll call it Type EXER1, and save. And now I can come back and I can refer to it later. So what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to throw away the type in a container. I'm going to click, drag it into the trash. I just want to concentrate on my text that's a header text. And the first thing I'm going to do is go through the settings for the text. So let's talk about deploying or activating or reactivating a type layer. First of all, when you're working in Photoshop and you create a type layer, it will look different from the other layers. It will have this T in the box here and then the word next to it. So that's how you know that you're in a type layer. There's a number of different types of type layers. I'm going to look at those in a second. So reactivating this type layer, let's say I want to make this, edit this text. I can click next to it and then I can add or subtract to the text. Now, that's good, but one of the things that I've noticed that people do a lot of times is they grab that type tool and they don't click quite close enough and they accidentally activate another type layer. I'm going to throw that type layer in the trash. So a better way to activate the type layer is to double click on the T, and that will activate the type layer. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the options for type. So starting up at the top is the font. And one of the cool things about Photoshop and Illustrator is that they've made this font tool very sophisticated. One is that they've made it where you can look at all the classes, and when I mouse over the classes, it shows me the font and how the text looks on the screen. Let's make it a little bit bigger so you guys can see what I'm doing. Let's move it down. And so when I go through these fonts, it automatically updates. Now, there's a couple of things that's really interesting about this. One is that I can isolate. I can say I want to just see all the serif fonts, or I want to see all the sans serif fonts or slab serif fonts. And so this is very helpful. It's a very helpful tool. I can also download fonts directly from the Adobe website, and I can make certain fonts favorites. Okay, so let's say I like this font here, Arial Bold. I'm going to click on that and set that in there. Now another way to activate that font list is to click and turn it blue, and then I can use the up-down arrow keys on my keyboard to sequence through my fonts. Okay. Now, some of the fonts will have an option like italicize or bold italic, for instance. Then I have the size of my text. And then I have the option called Antialias. Let's look what Antialias means. I'm going to zoom in on the text really close. And when I zoom in really close on the text, you'll see that this text is brown, and there's a lighter shade of brown on the edges of the text that's automatically generated by the computer that makes the text look smooth. If I double click and activate the type layer and I go up to the anti-alias and I set it to none, and then I look at the text, you'll see that it looks jagged on the edge. So I generally want that anti-aliasing feature to be on at all times. So let's turn that back on. And there's some options there as to how an anti-alias is sharp, smooth, etc. Most of the time, it doesn't matter. Any of those will work. The next is whether the text is left, centered, or right justified. Since this is just one word or one sentence, it doesn't matter if it's justified. I can just grab it and move around the screen. Now, when I create my block of text, I'll be concerned with the justification. Now, I'm going to double click and reactivate the type layer. Next is the color. So I can click in here and I can choose a color for my text. Okay. And when I choose that color, it's automatically added. I also can get an eyedropper out and sample anything on the screen. Next over from left to right is the warp text option. So I can take this and I can apply these warps like flag or arc or arch, bulge, etc. to my text. I'm going to turn that option off. I have a character palette. This is my character palette over here. And then there is also a paragraph palette. And we're going to go through the options on the character palette. And let's look at some of those now. So we've already looked at the font and the fact that it can have a variable like a bold or italicized. We've looked at the size. And we've looked at, let's look at the leading. So the leading is the space between two lines. In this case, leading won't apply, but when we work with our paragraph text, we'll look at leading. Next is the kerning. That's the space between two letters. So if I grab my type tool, click in between the two letters, I can adjust the kerning. So you see the letters are squashed further together, or I can push those two letters further apart. So kerning is generally the space between just two letters. I'm going to reset that back to 0. Next is tracking. That's the space between all the letters. So I can push letters further apart. Select that text. I can select the text and make it further apart or further together. And that is tracking. And what makes text attractive is a combination of the size, the leading, and the tracking. I can also take the text and scale it vertically or horizontally, and scale it by its width. And there are some superscripts underneath where I can do things like force a full bold, or force a italic, or force a all cap onto my text. Okay, I'm going to click the commit button. Now, the next thing we want to do is look at some of the different options for my text. Right now, this text is in an editable state. What that means is that I could come in here and I can change the text and what the text says at any time. So the first thing I want to do is take you through some different ways that the text can be modified. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the document at this time. I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to call this text, type XCR2 and save. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up to Type, and we're going to rasterize the type layer. So I'm going to go to Rasterize Type Layer. So what I've done is I've broken the text out from being vector and editable. It's now just paint. I can literally paint on this text, okay? 90% of the time, you're not going to need to do that, okay? There are some advanced graphics tutorials with text where you may be asked to take the text and make it rasterized. But most of the time, you're not going to need that. So when I do rasterize the text, I'm going to step backwards, Control Z. I'll copy the text first, and then just rasterize one version of the text and hide the other. So that way, if anything goes wrong, I can go back to the original vector text. All right. So first, what we did was we looked at taking the text and rasterizing it. I'm going to take that raster text and throw it in the trash. And the circumstances for using raster text is rare. Let's look at another option for editing our text. Let's go up to Type, and what we want to do is we want to convert the text to a work path. No, that's not it.